Hello and welcome back to the VolReport Show. I'm Ryan Sylvia. I'm joined by Noah Taylor. We are with VolReport.com on the Rivals Network, and we wanted to hop back onto the VolReport Show and give our thoughts about Tennessee men's basketball to this point. We're a little bit into SEC play. 3 games in, Tennessee sits at 2-1 in the conference slate, and they're 12-4 overall, with 4 losses that you can't really blame them too much for. None of them in Knoxville, all of them at either neutral sites or on the road to really solid programs. And they're now sitting at number 6 in the AP poll, dropping 1 spot from 5 after taking a road loss to Mississippi State. So it's been a good start for Tennessee. Noah, I want to start with you, though. What are your thoughts at this point in the year on what this Tennessee men's basketball team has done and kind of where they project to go going forward?
Yeah, I think you still got to feel good about where they are at this point. You mentioned some things there, with those 4 losses, obviously being away from home, being against really good teams. I don't think there was a team that has faced a gauntlet quite like Tennessee in non-conference. And obviously they've been tested right out of the gate in the 3 SEC teams that they've faced. And like you said, 2-1 in a good league. Dalton Connect is continuing to play at a really high level. You've got to be satisfied with where he is 3 games into SEC play, because I know he talked about it the other day when they were playing Georgia. Hearing some chatter out there on the court about moving up from Northern Colorado and playing at this level, and he's adjusted to that pretty well, I would say. But I'd say overall there's been some issues with consistency. You go from that just complete game effort against Ole Miss to the falling behind at Mississippi State, struggling in the paint. Never quite catching up in that one. I know you did tie it, but they pull away there at the end. But there seemed to be some lessons learned from that game, with the comeback win against Georgia the next couple days later. And I think that's a good sign, especially with 2 games coming up, because they always play well at home, as you mentioned. And it was a rough week for top 10 teams anyway, and Tennessee managed to split two road conference games. So overall, I think they're in a really good spot. I do think you need to see a little bit more consistency, because I don't think you can just count on Sakai and Dalton Connect night in and night out.
I think you hit on it when you said it was just a bad week for all those top-ranked teams, and that's just kind of college basketball. You're going to lose some games. It's almost impossible to run the table in conference play. You lost to Tolu Smith, who's probably the best big man in the SEC this year, and it was a game you still left feeling like you should have won. You're going to lose some games. You bounced back well by pitching that comeback against Georgia and leaving Athens with the win. It's basketball. You're going to lose some games. I think Tennessee has to feel pretty good about where they are going forward, especially if they can get this win over Florida and then get this win over Alabama at home and kind of take that next step towards building a little bit of maybe a lead at the top of the SEC. You definitely have to feel good going forward. This year has been a little bit different, though, than last year's team. Last year's team, an elite squad, a team that fell in the Sweet 16, but had the potential to go farther. And it was led by the number 1 adjusted defensive efficiency ranked team on Ken Pom. On the other side, though, their offense was the 64th best in adjusted offensive efficiency. When you compare that to this year, Tennessee's defense is still elite, 3rd best in the country in that category, but it's the offense that's taken this massive jump up to the 20th ranked adjusted offensive efficiency out of all the teams in college basketball. So are you okay with trading a little bit of that defense, maybe going from the best defense in the country to one of the top defenses to get that step forward on offense? Because it feels like that's the trade-off that we've had so far this year.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. I think, we've talked about it before when they went into the portal and got Dalton Connect and Jordan Gainey too, which I know he's been in a slump lately, but a guy we've seen played a really high level offensively at times this year. Yeah, I mean, that's something these Rick Barnes teams, that's been their identity. They've had a lot of success, focusing on the defense but having those games where you struggled offensively and it cost you. You go back and you look at that Florida Atlantic loss in the Sweet 16. You just mentioned it. Tennessee had a really good shot to make the second Elite Eight in program history. You felt good going into that game, but, some lulls in the offense kind of catch up to you there. I think that trade-off has worked really well for Tennessee. Yeah, it's taken a little bit of, not much, but a little bit of a step back. When you see what they've been able to do offensively this year, it's been pretty incredible. And I know, Dalton's been, the leading the charge there, but you've seen some really good offensive play out of Zakai Ziegler, which you kind of expect. And then, what Jonas Adu's been able to do in the paint, it's playing his best basketball, I think, as well, since he's been at Tennessee. So I think it's been a good trade-off for Tennessee. You would like to see some more, that word again, consistency out of some of those veterans. I think Santiago Vescovi, he's kind of an example, against Georgia, didn't do a lot offensively, did hit a three that helped, that rally late, but played really well on the defensive end. I think you're going to get, obviously, some games here soon where he plays at the style he did last year when he was carrying the offense. And Josiah, too, has played really well. Another guy that's kind of in a slump here lately, but I think overall the offense is in a really good place. And if you're Tennessee, I think you take that trade-off because we know how elite Rick Barnes' defenses can be, but what can this team do with a still elite defense and an offense that can, take over games the way that they have this year?
Yeah, I think it was a necessary trade-off. When you look at the recent national champions, they all have a pretty healthy balance of a good offense and a good defense. We're going to look at the adjusted offensive and defensive efficiencies on Ken Pom again, because I feel like that tells a good part of the story, a pretty good stat in this department to kind of judge how good these offenses and defenses are. Last year, UConn is your national champion. They have the third best offense in the country. In 2022, Kansas wins it with the sixth best offense. In 21, Baylor wins it with the second best offense. Skip 2020 because of the COVID year. In 19, Virginia wins it with the second best offense. In 2018, it's Villanova with the top offense. In 2017, it's UNC with the ninth. In 2016, Villanova with the third. 2015, Duke with the third. You have to go all the way back to 2014, where UConn had the 39th adjusted offense and were able to put together a pretty remarkable run and win the national championship. But if you look at all those, they all pair a good defense with it too. I won't go all the way through the numbers on those, but they do a good job of balancing the effective offense and good defense. And in the past for Tennessee, they had some really good teams, but it felt like it was more so maybe prioritizing on the defensive end instead of on the offensive end. But this step forward, I think, will go a long way for Tennessee and maybe help with the possible NCAA tournament run, which Tennessee has only gotten to the Sweet 16 under Rick Barnes in. Let's talk about Dalton Knecht, though. You mentioned him as kind of one of those key reasons the offense is taking a step forward, and that's pretty clear with the way he's played, especially in these last two games. Is he the SEC Player of the Year at this point? It's tough to find another guy that's really holding a candle to him because of the way that he started this year.
Yeah, he's made an incredibly strong case for it. And, he's the reason we talked about those two games last week. He's the reason Tennessee didn't lose those games, or didn't lose both of those games anyway. I know they lost Mississippi State, but gave them a chance to still be unbeaten in SEC play with the second half that he had. When it kind of felt out of reach. And then against Georgia, it was starting to feel out of reach then. And that one they're able to finish because of Dalton Knecht. And that was pretty amazing to watch. I think that you told me, we were sitting there in press row at Stegman Coliseum, and you had said, at that point late in the second half, just let him kind of take over, let him keep the ball unless somebody's just wide open. And that's pretty much what they did, and it paid off. And I know, there's some guys in that game too that did some different things. Zakai, Jonas having a big game, Santi defensively, but that was a Player of the Year effort from Dalton Knecht, and we've seen a few of those already. Especially on the road. I think that's his most incredible stat right now is how well he plays on the road, which we know in college basketball it's hard to win away from home, and and Tennessee's had some struggles on the road, but it's having a guy like that play at the level that he is, that's a huge asset for you, especially, come tournament time when you're obviously playing away from home, the however long you're there. But I think he's making a really strong case for it right now. And like you said, I don't really see anybody else at this point in time that could unseat him.
Yeah, he'll have to find a little bit of consistency, I think, in terms of playing well in Thompson Bowling as well. Doesn't need to score 30-plus points every night, but if he can be a consistent 20-plus guy and be the guy that the offense runs through, and every time you walk in the gym, Dalton Knecht's about to get his shots off, then I think that he should be the front runner. It's just a matter of, which is Rick Barnes' favorite word recently, is finding that consistency of getting to that level and staying at that level. And his defense still needs work, but if we're being honest, the SEC Player of the Year rarely takes too much defense into account. It's usually a bit of the Offensive Player of the Year. It's more of just an added thing if you are a great defender. And he's not been a negative defender by any means, but you can tell he's still got some breakdowns here and there, still kind of putting those pieces together. But I think he's got to be the favorite right now. There's still a lot of season left to be played, though, so we'll have to see how it goes. Helping Dalton connect, though, you mentioned him as well when we talked about trading a little bit of defense for an improved offense, is Zakai Ziegler at point guard. No more signs of rust after that ACL injury on the final day of February last year. He is fully back to Zakai Ziegler form, and it's been pretty cool to watch on both ends of the floor, not only as a scorer, but passing the ball really well, and then on defense coming up and applying ball pressure. So what have you thought about Zakai Ziegler at this point in the year?
Yeah, it seems like the coaches get asked about it every week. Did you see him being able to bounce back as quickly from that ACL tear last year, that injury that sidelined him the remainder of last season? And he's a guy that, we talk about, that Sweet 16 run. What could have been if Zakai Ziegler was healthy? It's one of those situations. Well, he looks 100%. I mean, and he has for a while now, playing some really, really good basketball. Obviously Dalton Knecht deserves a lot of praise for the last couple of weeks and last week, especially against Georgia. But, Zakai Ziegler is another guy who gets Mississippi State. For that first half, it was kind of the Zakai Ziegler show in that game, and then Dalton Knecht having a big second half. But that's kind of been the kind of year it's been for Zakai Ziegler. It's been very consistent. And, you couldn't be more – if you're Tennessee, you couldn't be more pleased with where he's at and his – I guess his he's past the rehab stage, I guess, but where he's been since that return from injury, because he's playing, I think, his best basketball right now.
Yeah, he feels like an all-SEC guard. We'll see if that's first, second, wherever that kind of ends up at. But he feels like another all-SEC player, and it looks like Tennessee might be on track to have two all-SEC guys at minimum, which is definitely a good sign heading into the postseason if you have some star-caliber players like that on your roster. I want to talk about the big men, though. Jonas Aidoo, the starter, he played the entire second half against Georgia, did a really good job. Double effort, pitched in 5 blocks as well. He's starting to reach his stride. And then off the bench, you have Tobe Awaka, sophomore, kind of providing that second punch. They've seen the floor a little bit together at times, but for the most part, it's kind of Tobe coming in to relieve Jonas, and there hasn't seemed to be much of a drop-off. What have been your thoughts on the two big men and how they've been utilized this year?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about guys – that have been in this program for a while, Jonas Aidoo being one of them as a junior. He's one of those two that's just seems to be playing his best basketball since he's been at Tennessee. Obviously a guy that has stepped into a much bigger role this year for the Vols than he was previously. Again, there's been some moments that are maybe a little concerning. That Mississippi State game, I mean, he was so dominant against Ole Miss. And he's largely been dominant in every game he's played this year. But, there were the 4 losses, we mentioned earlier. All 4 of those teams had an All-American or All-SEC caliber, forward, and Tennessee kind of struggled. So there's been a little inconsistency there. But overall, you got to be really pleased with Jonas Aidoo. And as you mentioned, Tobe, what he's been able to give you off the bench. And with the way Jonas was playing, Saturday, it was hard to pull him out of that game in the second half, which is obviously a big reason he was out there the whole time. But, when Tobe did come in early, I think there was a sequence there where he scored like 3 straight buckets for Tennessee. So, he's a guy that's playing really well too. And I know that's a Georgia team that lives and dies by its perimeter shooting. So maybe it wasn't as much of a challenge inside as some of those other teams have been. But it's a really good place to start for both those guys, I think. They didn't give Georgia a chance to establish anything inside. So a really good bounce-back performance after the game they had against Mississippi State, cleaned up the foul trouble. Kind of reestablished some dominance there. You mentioned the blocks too on the defensive end, what they were able to do rebounding. Overall, they've both, Jonas especially, has played well overall this season. You just like to see more performances like Saturday kind of continue here in SEC play.
It'd be nice if they can prove it against a proven big, though, heading into the postseason, because as you mentioned, all 4 of Tennessee's losses primarily came from a very good post player on the other side. So they've done a good job at dominating games that they're probably the best post player in, but it feels like we need to see them step up to the level of some of these elite bigs that are in college basketball. Because if you want to go to the Final Four, if you want to go to the national championship game or make Tennessee's second ever Elite Eight, then you're going to have to go through a couple of really solid big men. So I agree, though. Step in the right direction. They look good. You should feel good about them. You should feel happy with how they've played. But there is still a little bit of an unproven aspect to it that I'll be interested to see if they can kind of put together a good performance against another elite big before the end of the season, which looking at the schedule, there's not there's not a lot of elite bigs maybe left that they haven't played yet. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with the chances that they have. I have a question, though, a little bit more on kind of the fun hypothetical side, I guess. Who would win in a game, this year's team or the 2018-19 team that was led by Grant Williams, Admiral Schofield on the wing, Jordan Bone, Lamonte Turner, Jordan Bowden, Kyle Alexander, Yves Pons, John Fulkerson, that stacked team that just fell in the Sweet 16 to Purdue and was just seconds away from the second ever Elite Eight, or this team right now that looks poised to make one of those type of runs?
Yeah, I have my answer. It's going to be the 2018-19 team, and I felt more confident in that answer as you were listing off some of those names. The memory kind of comes back to you, even though it wasn't that long ago. I think the potential is there for this team to hang with them and belong in that conversation too. Because that obviously that 2018-19 team was one of the greatest overall teams in program history. But like I said, you look at some of the things that this team's been able to do this year. The win at Wisconsin, beating Illinois and Ole Miss convincingly, being able to kind of overcome struggles and get a gritty type win at Georgia. Those are the kind of things that team did too. So, I would still give that edge to 2018-19 with Grant, Admiral, and Pons. But given what, and what that team accomplished too, the talent, you see some of the guys that are still, Grant obviously being the biggest, but what they're doing at the next level right now. I think for this team to kind of unseat them in where they stand in program history, I think it's going to have to come down to what they do in the postseason. That team is kind of a big what if as well, because it came down to a controversial shot or foul call late against Purdue, and that game seemed kind of wrapped up for Tennessee. And there you go. You're playing in an Elite Eight, only the second time in school history. So if they did play each other on the court, I think it'd be a really, really fun basketball game, but I would give the edge to the 18-19 team.
I'll have to agree with you, and mostly because of Grant Williams.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just such a great player. It would be tough to match up with him. Obviously, he caused so many of those disadvantages while he was at Tennessee at the 4. Seeing him and just play against Josiah-Jordan James could be pretty fun. Josiah on defense there. But I think Grant would get the best of it. And I think that 2018-19 team is still the best team that Rick Barnes has had in his time at Tennessee. But as you said, if this team rips through a run in March Madness and makes that second ever Elite Eight, it's going to be tough to argue with results, even though 2019 was such a loaded March Madness bracket. And as you mentioned, it was a game that Tennessee sometimes still feels like they got robbed in a little bit, depending on how you look at it. It's tough to argue with the banner. So we'll have to see what this March Madness holds for this Tennessee team, because that might be kind of what the deciding factor ends up looking like. Before we get out of here, though, before the season, we both said this team is Elite Eight bound, but we're not too sure about the Final Four just yet. Last time we checked in on it, we agreed with the same statement heading into conference play. Now that we have another couple of games under our belt, is that still the sentiment?
Man, I kind of went back and forth on this one, and I'll go back. The reason why is something we've talked about just a few minutes ago and what you mentioned. I would say I'll go Sweet 16. I definitely think that obviously Elite Eight is not out of the realm of possibility by any stretch of the imagination. I think a Final Four. I think when we've seen this team play at the level they've played, when everybody's clicking, when you are getting the most out of those veteran guys and Dalton Connect's playing well, that's a Final Four team easily. But it's going to have to be, you got to have more than one or two guys carrying the team at times. Like you can't get into March and rely solely on Dalton Connect or Zakai, and then have a game which we just talked about where you're playing an elite big and Jonas Adu is struggling and Tobey's struggling off the bench. I think that is making me a little bit more hesitant than before. So I'll say Sweet 16. But again, it's a team that could easily make a Final Four, and that's not going to shock anybody, I don't think.
I feel like it's one of those years you need to see the bracket before you do anything, where you want to see who Tennessee pulls, who that second game is likely going to be against, who they would see in the Sweet 16 in games like that before you make a bold or confident statement on where they're going to go. But I'll stick with the Elite Eight, but I agree that it's more regressed more than made me more positive about their chances just because of the last week. And you finish 1-1, and as we said, you're going to lose some basketball games, but falling into two different holes, and although they climbed out of one of them, is not the greatest sign. And that's two teams that are playing for March Madness spots that Tennessee could theoretically see again in March, but they're not elite SEC teams. You showed what you can do against Ole Miss, who's still a really good basketball team, but you showed that peak that you can reach and that will lead you to Elite Eight, Final Four. But now you've also shown the inconsistencies that are still somewhat there. So I'll stick with Elite Eight, but Final Four wouldn't surprise me. Sweet 16 bounce also wouldn't surprise me. We'll have to see what this season ends up holding for Tennessee. And if Rick Barnes can kind of get over that hump that's kind of plagued him throughout his career, and especially at Tennessee. That'll do all from us here today, though. Head over to VolReport.com for all of our written content. Tennessee will be back in action tomorrow, since this is posted on Monday, but Tuesday night against Florida. So that'll be a big game before they host Alabama as well to try to, as we said, build maybe a little bit of a lead here in the SEC as the conference play really gets going. Football season is never over in Knoxville as well. We have recruiting coverage, team coverage. The transfer portal is not done. Nick Saban retired. That has a lot of stuff to do with Tennessee, of course. So we have discussions involving that and everything else as well. So head over to VolReport.com for everything you need on Tennessee athletics. And thank you for watching.